Hey friends, welcome back. I read 10 books in the month of May and we have things to discuss. Obviously, this month we had some fantasy, we had a touch of sci-fi, some literary fiction, but it was predominantly a romance month for me. And it was all because of this book right here, Funny Story by Emily Henry. I was worried going into this because Happy Place was not my favorite by her, but Funny Story, wow. It really did it for me. If you don't know, Beach Read is my favorite Emily Henry. I feel like it always will be. And Funny Story is rivaling Beach Read for me. Like, it is a very close second place in the tier ranking of Emily Henry's books for me. Guys, I freaking loved it. I loved it so much. In the story, we have our two main characters, Daphne and Miles, and they become roommates out of really unfortunate, horrible circumstances. Daphne and her fiance actually break up because her fiance ended up telling her that he's in love with his childhood best friend, Petra. So obviously that engagement is off, but little do we know that Petra's boyfriend at the time is Miles. And now that Daphne's engagement is off, she needs a place to live, and Petra and Miles are freshly broken up and Miles needs a roommate. So our two main characters are now roommates while their significant others are now together. It's very messy. The catchline is two total opposites, the wrong thing in common. Now that's a funny story. When I first started reading this book, I was like, this is a little bit far-fetched. This is kind of silly, but that is sort of the vibe of the book, you know? Like, yes, the setup is a little bit outlandish, but the banter is phenomenal. These two main characters are very different, but they have so much depth within their separate characters, and then when they come together and learn things about each other, it's really quite beautiful. And it is set in Michigan, which I love Michigan. And one thing I really appreciated about this story is how Emily Henry talked about how our main character Daphne had to learn how to be alone, had to learn how to be comfortable with herself and not always rely on other people or external forces to be okay and make herself happy. There were so many little conversations like that that just really hit home for me, and I think that this story was phenomenal. It was 5 stars. This book is what set me down the spiral of more romance books and led me to one of my book of the month choices. So before we continue on the wrap up, let me tell you about book of the month. I'm sure you've seen these wonderful little blue boxes around the internet, and if you haven't, let me tell you that they are from book of the month. This cute little blue box can bring you new and early release titles from authors that you may or may not have ever heard of every single month. The book of the month team curates this list of 5 to 7 choices that we get to choose from every single month, and it is amazing because I am a very busy person, and if I can take some of that work off of my plate from doing research and finding new titles and new authors, and I just have it like spoon-fed to me, yes, like I really want the convenience. And that's one of my favorite things about book of the month, is because I have found so many authors that I probably wouldn't have found otherwise, just like my 2 choices that I made this month. I told you that I was on a romance kick, and that means that one of my choices is obviously a romance, and it is 1-star romance by Laura Hankin. I loved this cover so much, and the premise sounds right up my alley. It's about our 2 main characters, Natalie and Rob, and they're walking down the aisle for a friend's wedding, and right before they walk down the aisle, Natalie learns that Rob wrote a very public 1-star review of her book. Thus, obviously creates some turmoil, but throughout their lives, they keep getting thrown back into situations whenever their friends celebrate a milestone, and they slowly start to learn that sometimes your own harshest critic can be your perfect match. Sounds like a little romp of a romance, and I am really excited to pick it up. The other book that I chose, I was immediately drawn to by the title. It is The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjan Kamali. The Lion Women of Tehran follow 2 young girls who grew up together, shared ambitions to become lion women, but ultimately get pulled apart, but eventually pulled back together, which then alter the course of the rest of their lives. And I'm really excited to learn about their story and read from a new author that I have not read from before. If neither of these sound up your alley, there are so many others that you can choose from if you click the link down in my description. And if you do, at checkout, use the code BREEZE, which can get you your first box for $9.99. Thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. And moving into the rest of the wrap up, I told you that Funny Story just catapulted me into a romance reading mood. So for the last vlog that I posted, it was the Cindianapolis 500, where I tried to read 500 pages in 500 minutes. That is more explained in the video. I'll link it down below. It was really fun. I really liked that video. I read 2 romance books in it. I read How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwong, as well as Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Thoughts on these 2 books, I'll leave a little bit brief just because I talk about them in pretty good depth in that video. But Just for the Summer, I ended up giving like a 4.5 to 5 stars. I don't know if it is quite 5 stars all the time. It kind of fluctuates, but I honestly think that it was a very well-crafted story between our 2 main characters. One of them is a travel nurse, and the other is just a young man that is living this sort of like bachelor lifestyle until he has to take Oh, I just kicked you. Wow, so sorry. But our male main character, Justin, has to take guardianship of his younger siblings. And then our other main character, Emma, had a very hard upbringing and a very toxic relationship with her mother. But what they have in common is that whenever they seem to date anyone, after they break up, the person that they are no longer with finds the love of their life. Like, it happens every single time. And both of them find each other via like a Reddit thread, and they decide to date each other for the sheer purpose of canceling out their curses. And once they break up, they'll find the love of their lives. This is book 3 in the Part of Your World romance trilogy that Abby Jimenez has been writing. And I don't think that you have to read them in order, but like to get the most out of the story, I would, because once we got some of that crossover from the other 2 books, it was so much fun. And I definitely would recommend this book and this whole series. Then I read How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwong. This one, ended up giving this one 4 stars because I actually really liked our main character, Helen, and how Yulin Kwong built her character and her values and struggles, because I did feel seen in a lot of the conversations about friendships and never feeling like you really quite belonged in any friend group. Those conversations brought up in the story were phenomenal, but there were just a couple things within the storytelling that made me pause. The story itself is about our main character, Helen. She wrote a book. It's getting adapted into a screenplay, and Grant is working within the TV show production as one of the writers. And they have a history. They went to high school together, and something happened to where they are traumatically bound together. You find out on the second page what that trauma bond is, but just in case, like, I won't say it here. I do talk about it a little bit more in that reading vlog, so again, check that out. But there are certain things surrounding that situation that made it a little bit more difficult for me to get into the story completely. Thus, it is a 4-star. But I do, like, oddly feel good about this book. Like, it's kind of mixed emotions, but I ultimately liked it. Let's just keep it going. I read Done and Dusted by Lila Sage. This was my book club pick for last month. If you don't know, I run a book club over in my Patreon called The Greenhouse, and it is so much fun. Feel free to check that out if you ever want to join us. We would love to have you. We read Done and Dusted. We had a great little discussion about it. It was so fun that the second one, Swift and Saddled, is going to be our buddy read pick for this next month in June. But this one was such an easy, quick read, and I don't really have anything that's like super special to say about it because I had a great time. I liked our main characters. There were a couple things about them and their development that didn't quite make sense to me. Like, for example, the tagline is "She's off limits, but he's never been good at following the rules. It's a small town brother's best friend romance." And our main character is Emmy, and she is like a really great horse racer, and she goes through this traumatic event. She has to take a little break. She moves back to her small town, and Luke Brooks, the male main character, is, you know, the love interest. And he's sort of like used to be a bad boy, but now he's better and has taken ownership of the local bar, and he's trying to be an upstanding citizen, I suppose. And basically, between his character outside of like the steamy scenes and within the steamy scenes, there just seemed to be like a little bit of a disconnect. It didn't feel like the same person. Also, I think this was the book that kept using the pet name Sugar a lot, and I know that's like a really southern thing and like western country whatever thing to say. It was just used so much that I never want to hear it again. But all of that to say, I still had a really good time. I'm excited to read the second one. I gave this 4 stars. Okay, now we're moving into the kind of romance fantasy. Okay, we're doing a bridge book, and I read Ashes and the Star-Cursed King by Carissa Broadbent. That is the second book in the duet that is from Serpent and the Wings of Night. One of my best friends is actually borrowing Ashes and the Star-Cursed King right now, which is why I have a photo of it. But I have had so much fun with this little series. We got some really good character arcs. We got really good development within the world and politics. I don't think it'll go down as like one of my top 10 favorite things ever, but it doesn't have to in order for me to just still love it. There are still things within the story that I think could have been fleshed out a little bit more or explored a little bit more deeply, but ultimately I loved it. I loved all of these books, and this book, Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, was such a fun little conclusion to this story of these characters. I know that there's a third one coming out that I cannot wait to read, and I'm just excited to have found a romantasy author that kind of clicks with me, and I'm looking forward to trying out her other books for sure. I think I gave Ashes and Star-Cursed King like 4.5 stars. And honestly, if you're looking for just a fun romantasy vampire book, like read this series. It's fun. It's super fun. Now I need everyone to give me a round of applause. I finally finished The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. Thank you. Thank you. Been reading this for a little bit. This is deceivingly a very long book. It is like 500 pages, but the pages are very thin, the words are very small, and if you've heard anyone else talk about this book, it'll probably be similar to what I'm about to say. It is the most uniquely written fantasy story I've ever read. We jump between like 3 different modes of storytelling, where the overarching plot of the story is 2 young men are shepherding an ancient god across a broken land to get to like their end goal. It is told in such a way that requires attention and just sheer willpower. This is a book that I would recommend tandem reading. Like having the audiobook while reading it with my eyes was really, really beneficial, because within the storytelling, there are italics, which are typically like either thoughts that someone in the scene is having, or they are almost like footnotes within the scene that is playing out. There are 5 parts within this story, and within the parts, there aren't really chapters, but they are broken up. Like you can see the little breaks within the pages. Like there are things like that all the time that usually signify like a point of view change, and it's seamless. It's really like a feat. I think that this book is brilliant. I think the way that Sabin Yemedes told this particular story is incredible. Do I think that I understood every part of it? No, absolutely not. I'm still a little bit confused, but I think that this is one that I will keep and probably reread at some point in the future because of that fact. I think I could glean more and more from it anytime that I did reread it, and it's exciting enough to want to reread it. Like it's a very fast-paced book, but it still was very long. Oh, I don't know. It's a wild book. It's really, really good, but you have to be open-minded and ready to just be along for the adventure if you decide to pick this up. I'm giving this like a 4 or a 4.5. Then I read Can't Spell Treason Without Tea by Rebecca Thorne. This is a little cozy fantasy book. People compare it to Legends and Lattes a lot. Our 2 main characters are sort of running away from all their responsibilities. They both are prominent people within their like realm of work, but they decide to run away and open up a little tea and bookstore within the part of the world that is considered dragon country. What follows is a cozy tale of mishaps, mysteries, and a murderous queen throwing the realm's biggest temper tantrum. And okay, so it's compared to Legends and Lattes. Legends and Lattes, that whole little series that is going on with Travis Baldree, like it's one of my favorite things ever. I truly love his writing and his characters and everything, and I think that those were pretty big shoes to fill to compare it to for me personally. So my thing is with this story is, in my mind, I like it a lot more than I know that I actually did. I hope that makes sense. When I was reading this book, I didn't really care that much. I wasn't drawn into the characters or the setting that much. I kind of just felt myself wandering. I couldn't really be glued to the page. Now, like in retrospect, thinking about everything that happened within this story, it's actually pretty dynamic and it really is a fun book. But I think that when I read it, I wasn't in the mood. And I don't think that I knew that until now, because now I'm a little bit like confused on my rating. At the time, it was a solid 3 because of, you know, the wandering and not really thinking that I was super into it. And now I'm not sure if that's so true for me or if I just wasn't, again, in the mood. So take that with what you will. I think that it is worthwhile if you like cozy fantasy. I think you could really like this because it's fun. I mean, you get sapphics opening up a tea shop, there's dragons, there's an angry queen, there's, you know, a lot of things going on. It's cute, but I think it's like a 3 or 3.5 for me. I don't really know. That's kind of where I'm leaving it. Then we took a little bit of a diversion into sci-fi. I ended up reading Binti by Nnedi Okorafor, and I actually listened to this audio while doing some yard work with Caleb one day, and it's really short, so I finished it whilst doing that yard work, and it was super fun. I'm really excited to continue this series. For being so short, I became way more invested than I thought that I would, so I honestly think that this is like a 4.5 stars, which is really surprising for me. I was not expecting that. I really liked it. Okay, 2 more books. The first one we will talk about is A Man Called Uwe by Frederick Bachman. This was last month's Greenhouse Compendium pick, recommended to me by one of my patrons. I'm like 99% sure it was Joules. And this one is following our main character, who is a grumpy old man, set in his routines, has a short fuse. You know, you can picture that type of older guy. When one day a young couple with 2 young daughters move in next door and they kind of shake up his whole world. They begin to alter his daily routine and he starts to find himself a little bit more drawn out into the world. And this book is really heartwarming and sad at the same time, because we're watching Uwe sort of like remember what it's like to live, because you learn that he has lost his wife and now he is living alone and doesn't really feel like the will to live. And this appearance of this young couple and these young girls really sort of, I wouldn't say change his mind completely, because you learn throughout the entire book that he still struggles, but it is really, really beautiful. Typically I've seen people really sob at this book. I was expecting to cry. I teared up, but I didn't actually like cry like I did with Just for the Summer and Funny Story. Actually, I didn't say that earlier. I sobbed. Ugly cried at Just for the Summer. And Funny Story, I also cried. But anyways, back to the story. Hi. I think it's really great. And I think it's a solid 4. The last book, kind of ending on a not so positive note, actually. The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell. This is Notes on Modern Irrationality. And I actually just listened to it by audio because I think Amanda Montell narrates it. And I listened to her other book, Cultish, which I really loved. So I was really excited for her new release. I honestly, what do you want me to say about it? I don't think that I have anything to really tell you at all about this book. I know that at the end of the book, or even at the end of every single chapter, I remember pausing the audiobook and being like, okay, what did I even learn? Like, what am I taking away from this story? And I just didn't have an answer. It felt like the points that she was trying to make within these little subsections of the story were so meandery and not always so tightly related to the point that she was trying to make. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. And I feel bad even like putting a rating on it. Like, it's honestly probably like a 2-star for me, which is really sad because I loved Cultish and I want to love this because this cover is so freaking beautiful, but I genuinely don't even know what it's about. I don't even know what I read. At least not enough to like tell you about it, you know? So that's it, I guess. But honestly, aside from that last book, like really, really solid reading month for me. I'm super excited about what June has in store. And I'm also really excited about these 2 new books that I got from Book of the Month. Don't forget to use the code BREEZE at checkout to get your first box for $9.99. And if you do, let me know down in the comments what you ended up choosing. I'd be really interested to see. Or let me know some of your thoughts on some of the books that I read this month, if you agree or disagree. But if you don't know what else to say, then leave me the little guy in the cowboy hat down below in the comments. And while you're down there, please do subscribe and like the video. I always appreciate your support. And of course, be kind to one another and happy reading. Bye!